This book about DNA and cell resonance, I presented the first time at the second DNA Day in Dalian in China in 2011. And in this book I have worked out some special ideas, and one I still want to add, which is about the task of the introns. And I have published a paper in the Journal of Cell Communication and Signaling by the Springer Verlag in New York. And this paper is about this special point. And this has been printed in 2012 in I think in April, it was in the April issue. So
peer-reviewed?
It's peer-reviewed, yeah. Well, it's a very, very important journal with a high ranking. So if you are interested in this paper, the quickest way to get this information, to get this paper, is that you enter my homepage, www.mynameismeyl, MEYL.eu, and then under pages, under papers, you find this this paper. I've made it available so that you can read it very easily. Yes, the content is interesting. I start
Short
with
questions. What are introns? Junk DNA?
Yes, I explain. It's junk DNA, what it is called in general. Well, I start with some equations in physics, which are essential. Let's have at the field description. On the left side, we have the description in the textbooks, which is the first Maxwell equation, the Ampere's law, and on the right side, which is the second Maxwell equation, which is the law of induction. What I have mentioned or figured out in red color is new, it is added, but we see that this small b, which I call a potential density, corresponds in duality to the J, which is the current density. And this small or this vector which is added corresponds, as we see from the equation of continuity, to what the divergence B is describing. This is called a magnetic monopole. On the left side we see the electric monopoles, and the electric monopoles are the charge carriers, the electrons, for instance, so this is well accepted. But the magnetic monopoles have not been developed till 2009, so that if we
detected,
if we have developed such magnetic monopoles, then this has an enormous consequence, because then these potential density has to exist as well.
And that means you made an addition to the Maxwell equations.
Yes, and 20 years ago I was showing that these derivation of the second Maxwell equation of the law of inductions has to be extended. It is an extended or expanded field theory, and my paper was first accepted, but then it was trashed by some peers who said magnetic monopoles do not exist, and this is why this description has to be wrong. Unproved only because of what they have learned at school, it has to be wrong. And this changed, or has changed, in 2009, so it's not long ago, when the Helmholtz Society in Berlin and Dresden have developed magnetic monopoles. And this was called development of the century. So this is absolutely important, since the Nobel Prize winner Paul Dirac has called for these magnetic monopoles, but nobody was able to find them.
And they made devices you can use in some...
Doesn't matter. It's absolutely unimportant, because if there is only one example where the divergence B is not zero, then we have to consider again what influence for the electrodynamics is existing. And this is why now we have a new situation in electrodynamics, absolutely new. But what I want to figure out here in these slides is that this equation of continuity is showing that the divergence B, small b, has to do with the magnetic monopoles in the same equation, and these potential density, well, the dimension is volt per square meter, and it is dual to the current density in ampere per square meter we have on the left side, according to the textbooks. Here we have just the dual situation. On the left side we have these currents, and we have as a consequence the current vortices, which are called eddy currents. And these are expanding vortices, and on the right side we have the contracting, I could say, anti-vortex, which I call a potential vortex. So this is new.
And you detected it?
Well, I detected it. I even developed this potential vortex 20 years ago. But you see that the scientific community was ignoring this development, and till they have found the one example for the magnetic monopoles, and now they have the situation that they have developed something, but they have never considered about the consequences. But I have it in my books, and I was exactly in the same year, 2009. At the end of the year, I have had this book ready, which was translated in English on 2010, Self-Consistent Electrodynamics. And this book is describing and collecting all the ideas I just have had published before in my book, especially in the book Scalar Wave, which is my very thick one, which is my material collection, collecting all the ideas about scalar waves and about the potential vortices. So I have, it was very easy for me to collect just what was needed to describe the self-consistent electrodynamics. I did this when it was necessary in 2009. Well, and here I describe the consequences, and we can explain the consequences in practical solutions, the dual properties. Here on the left side, up to the textbooks, we have a description of the eddy currents showing the skin effect. You have perpendicular to the space of the eddy currents where they are floating, we have the magnetic field strength. On the right side, just the dual situation when these potential vortices are producing an electric field strength. So that this duality shows just the opposite effect. In duality to the expanding vortex we have the contracting vortex, to the skin effect we have the structure forming, which is new, whereas the eddy currents are decaying in at the edge of the conductor. The contracting vortices are always decaying in the center of the vortex. The time constants are describing how long they live till they decay. The eddy currents get more stable with increasing conductivity. So superconductivity would be the best situation, that they do not decay anymore, whereas the potential vortex is increasing or get more stable with decreasing conductivity. So in the vacuum, this is the situation where they do not decay anymore. And they are proportional, one time to the permittivity, other time to the permittivity. Okay, so let's have a look in practical applications. Here you have a practical application, eddy currents in high voltage cables. We know that the currents are floating only next to the surface. This is why we call it a skin effect. And on the right side we have a fiber optic cable where the amplitude or intensity is maximum in the center of the cable. This is an explanation why the fiber optic cable have less losses than the copper cables, because the fields are concentrated in the center. Let's have a practical application how these potential vortices and where they exist. It is, for instance, the nerve conduction. Here you have the nerve conduction, and what we learn is that nature works only with scalar waves. Well, these vortices in this case are called action potential by scientists of biology, and these nodes of Ranvier show the nodes of long-tail wave, so that this transportation of information in nerves is a practical use of scalar waves. Tesla has shown that in duality for currents it is applicable, and that when he was insulating his line, his copper cable, in such a way as the nerves are doing with knots, then he could maximize the effect. So he could especially fully destroy the harmonics. No harmonics were transported anymore. Only the basic wave was receiving the receivers. This is an intelligent system, what we are using in the biology. And now what I want to do is I want to compare in duality cable, standard cable with currents, to a strand which could be the DNA in the helix, using dielectric currents, let's say, or dielectric potentials. On the left side we have the rule of a screw, and we know that all around such a cable we have the magnetic field, and if we have the dual situation on the right side, then we see that this rule in duality is existing as well. And we know from these law of induction, which I have written here, that perpendicular to the electric field we get an inducted field part, and the two vectors are added as vectors, vectorial addition, then the resulting field pointer looks from the center to the outside. This is why this cable has the effect of an expanding vortices with these well-known skin effect. And on the right side we have the opposite thing, and the opposite or dual solution, and here these added vector from these two parts, vectoral addition gives a vector from outside just directed to the center. So this is why we have in fiber optic these situation. Well, this explains a lot. If you want to have a solution with less losses, then this concentration of field is much better than those fields who are running apart with a skin effect. Okay, let's apply this to our DNA strand. On the left side we have, for example, high power AC generators where we have this problem, and the solution, in the practical solution to minimize the losses, was found by a German engineer, Röbel, and it is called the Röbel bar, that I'm using a lot of small cables. Together they have the ability of a big cable, but the skin effect is minimized by these turning of these strands of these cables. And it is interesting to know that this Röbel bar has been developed for the company Siemens, but nobody mentioned that this is really important, and so he went to ABB, and the competitor in Switzerland, and
in Sweden.
In Sweden, now in Sweden. At that time it was BBC. It was only in Switzerland, and so they have been able to produce high power generators with about between 10 and 100 times more power than the generators could have till that time. So this was really an important effect, and Siemens had to pay a lot of license to ABB to use the same. Yeah, so this is history, but it is sometimes inventors have a very lot of stones on the way, so that they get problems. It's not easy to have a good idea and to bring it into the market, as this example shows. Well, what about the dual system? How to avoid all the losses in a system which is dielectric, and which is working with these dual system? Well, then we need to have as well such a wounded system which looks like a vortex, and that is avoiding that we have these concentration in the center of the vortex. And this is why we are using a double helix. And this is one solution, a very intelligent one. And this is why the biological system is using this.
But how is it exactly avoiding it? Because it's a double helix.
You see, in the Röbel bar, we have avoided the decay of the vortices on the skin, as we were using these separated cables, and they were mixed up so that at the end, and following the vortex, following this field pointer, which I have calculated before, and here we have the field pointer showing to the center with the double helix, and so that they all would collect in the center and would produce a lot of heat in the center. But if I'm using these double helix, then they can't concentrate in the center, and so this is avoided. The losses are avoided.
And if I use more strings in the DNA, it would be even better.
Yeah.
Because they're supposed to be people with 12-string DNA.
Well, anyway, it's not so important how it is wound up. The importance is that it is wound up. Just as the Röbel bar. The best solution is if you follow exactly up to the used frequency the right wounding up. But the double helix, we have different solutions in biology so that they all work. They all work well. It's only important that you don't have a strand which is straight on like a fiber optic cable. The industry using fiber optic cables, for instance, for cutting steel with laser signals, so that laser is very strong. And what they have to pay attention is that the fiber optic cable could get black in the center by these high voltages or high currents. It's not like glass anymore. It's black, and it's producing a lot of losses. Well. For the industry, it could be important as well to learn from biology. This is what I want to say. Here you see that again the rule of the screw for both situations with these vectors, and if you want to use them in practice, then these current system would be usable in a transformer, toroidal transformer, and on the right side we have the histones, which are exactly in this situation, so that we can learn from it that the magnetic field pointer even is the one where the produced magnetic wave is running towards. Or here you have the well-known situation of an electric or a histone in such a fiber. It is called a 30 nanometer fiber, as the DNA is wound up, and this is producing a new scalar wave, which is a carrier wave, and this is important. And here I have the calculation of the histone speed compared to the speed of the DNA. Then you see it is the speed of the DNA is 35 times quicker, so that we are able to calculate what the frequency is, and we see that it is infrared radiation heat it is at the end. So that this explains again that the DNA wave, which I have in this frequency diagram, is showing that we have as well some resonances for carrying this information wave as a carrier wave, and which are in the region of infrared. I can say if communication and energy supply of the cells are using the same antenna, the condition is that we have an identical wavelength. And the approach is that infrared radiation or temperature determines the condensed form and structure of the DNA strand, but this has to be proved anyway. So this was one point, but I have lost or not explained what the junk DNA is. So let's now we have the background to understand what the junk DNA is. if this vortex is moving through the helix, helical structure, then all the information is carried out of the core of the cell, maybe to the next cell, but the information transportation is needing a resonance between both the one which is transmitting and the other one, cell or whatever, which is receiving the information. And this resonance needs to have the same frequency on both sides. The opposite phase angle, that means if one is plus, the other has to be minus, or if it is a magnetic scalar wave, if one is showing the north pole, the other has to show the south pole, then we know that we get resonance. And the third task is that for resonance, that both have the same form of a curve. Form of a curve means sinusoidal form, for instance, or rectangular, or if it is very complex modulated, then the complex modulation has to be the same. And then they go into resonance. The problem is, let me explain, the problem is, if there is information on one cell and has to transport it to another cell, then if the information doesn't exist at the receiver cell, they don't go into resonance. They have no chance to go into resonance. And this is why we need the junk DNA. Now we understand this, because the junk DNA is 80, 90% or even more. So that most of the information is exactly the same, so that these cells go into resonance, and only the few information which is in addition may differ, but this is not disturbing the resonance. And this is why they go into resonance. It is absolutely important if as well, if the cells have different tasks. If we have maybe stomach cells and other cells which have not a task to talk to the others, then they have different introns, so that they don't go into resonance. The introns have a very important task, that only those information which is needed has the ability to go, and has to go, the ability to go to resonance. I think this is absolutely essential, because, well, the Nobel Prize was given to the development of these junk DNA, and I've learned to know this person in Richardson on the second DNA Day in China, because there have been 10 Nobel Prize winners, and he was one of them. But he didn't know how it was working and why these junk DNA is needed. And I think this is absolutely a clear description.
As a layman, I always thought that the information is going from one cell to the neighbor cell, and because the neighbor cell is so similar, therefore they could have a resonance. But that was nonsense.
Well, you see, the problem is that everything nowadays is explained by biochemistry, and that many scientists and PhD aspirants and so on are looking for carriers, for particles who are carrying the information, but nobody knows why, and there is even no particle who is moving that way. They want to have it, and if they find something, why is it doing it? Why is it carrying the information? No answer, you see. If I find a particle, I have no answer. And the education in electrical engineering, especially in the properties of the electric field, is zero today. for biologists. And this is why we need these interdisciplinary scientific work, which is absolutely essential. And I hope that they now start working on this field and trying to explain it with other possibilities, because physics has such a big amount of possibilities presenting, and we only have to use it.
But in brain research they say that the melatonin is a transmitter and a messenger, and if they change something they can improve against depression and so on.
What they may be, but what they have not proved is the causality. Mm-hmm. Because if we have an effect, we don't know what the cause was. It could be just the opposite, that the chemical effect and structure is a consequence of the electrical influence, so that scalar waves are the one which are used for communication, and what we observe is the consequence, but not the cause. So the causality is changing if you add these new ideas in the textbooks.
But that means the introns, the junk DNA, has different character, different structure in different cells.
Yes, if they have specialized, then they have no ability to communicate with cells outside of this organ. You see, we have communication inside one organ, and one organ stops at one point, and there is another organ, and there is no communication directly. But we have these communication centers, which are the stem cells. The stem cells have more abilities to communicate with a higher level.
Aha.
This is why we have stem cells.
And why they use it against cancer and others.
Yeah, because if you go or communicate with the stem cells, then you have the communication to all the other cells which are in a lower level.
And how is this system flexible to totally new information which is vital for the body?
For all information.
Because we know that experiences can change DNA in lifetime.
Yeah.
And that means there's a total new information coming into the body, changing the DNA. That must be transported, but there must be a flexibility.
It has to be, because otherwise we would have no development on Earth of plants, human beings, and so on. The development needs that we have to change our DNA. If the environmental situation is changing, for instance, and this is why a human being, when the baby, the first time, is not supported from the mother, but from outside. If it is just born, it has to be tuned by the field situation of the environment.
And that's astrology.
Yes, it has an influence. Well, science of today is not handling all these ideas which are very, very old, but not provable, and this is why they ignore it, or say it's parascientific. But only because they all need a very big trash for those ideas they don't understand.
My picture of the junk DNA earlier was that somebody mixed with the human's DNA and switched off vital parts, that they are less capable, and that was the reason for it. But your explanation sounds more reasonable.
Yes, there are a lot of speculations in this field if you have no correct explanation. But what I do is that I always try to reproduce these ideas in a technical way, as we have done by reproducing the Tesla system, so that we are able to reproduce what is resonance and how does it work, and how to bring and how to keep a system in resonance. So this is what is necessary to understand what biology is doing. Or you produce a dual system, and then just to learn about what the biology is doing. Biology is optimizing the systems since millions of years and billions of years, and the technical optimization is only 100 years old.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor May. It was again very thrilling to listen to you.
Okay, thank you for the possibility to speak at White TV.